Before we get into the video, by the way, this is the tier list in case you're curious, but I do explain my thoughts as to why I've placed champions like this. Please do subscribe to the channel if you enjoy the content. I'm actually going to be flying out to Poland, where I'm going to go to a finals for the Polish Ultraliga with my team. I work with Orbit Anonymous. I am a mid lane coach for that team and a draft coach, and I do some of the early game stuff. So if you guys want to watch that, if you want to watch yours truly, the coach, on stage, then I would highly appreciate that as well. It is going to be played on the 23rd, so if you want to check that out, be my guest. I think it might be cool for some of you. Hello everyone. Welcome back to another tier list. This is where we left off last time. I'm not sure if I actually ended up publishing the video where I talked about these changes, but to give you a quick TLDR of what I thought were the biggest changes last patch, Ahri went straight up into the OP tier. Mostly it was just the top of the tier list that shifted around a bit. Ahri went into the OP tier list. I think this champion is just absolutely broken right now, with Malignance first into Horizon Focus, and then you can shift into either defensive items with a Banshees or an Hourglass, or go Deathcap, or like Faker does, go Rylai's. Faker doesn't do it consistently, but he does it quite often. You can also run Lichbane first item if you want a little bit more damage output and you want to be more of a side lane threat. This build is a lot better for like nuking people per se, and is good in longer fights because you can get more Lichbane procs. I think I moved some of the champions down, if I'm not mistaken. Brand got hit a little bit in the mid lane. Twisted Fate got nerfed a little bit hard, so he's not as good anymore. But this is where we start the tier list now. So the first thing that we need to look at is the karma changes. Karma changes are pretty big, actually. I think these changes will end up kind of hitting her out of the OP tier. Her mana is getting targeted very heavily, which is a bit of a problem because the main way that Karma played fights previously as a full AP champion is more as an artillery mage. You threw out a lot of Alt Q, Alt Q, Alt Q, and you just poked that way when you reached late game, and just hitting one of them and connecting one of them would basically be enough to turn a fight. She would get a lot of Alt Qs off. The entire idea is, well, if you Alt Q one person and it hits, your Alt cooldown gets refunded and you can Alt Q again, and you can just keep blasting them out once you reach the late game stages. But now, first of all, her passive, or her ult, does not get reduced as much by her passive. That's a bit of an issue. The cooldown on her ult is going up, which is also pretty bad. It goes up scaling. And the mana on her Q goes up by quite a substantial amount. This mana pool is getting doubled, or this mana cost is getting doubled, basically, which is quite rough. That means you are not going to be able to get as many Alt Qs off. And this is not just in late game fights. This is also going to be for wave clearing. This is double at level 9, right? Consider that. You throw around 2 Qs on the wave at level 9 to fully push it in. That is now going to cost twice the amount of mana. It is now 160 instead of the 90 that it previously cost you. That is going to be very rough. You're going to run out of mana quite quickly. You're not just going to be able to shove every single wave without taking bases, which is what kind of was OP about Karma before as well. You could kind of choose whenever you wanted to base, and you could constantly shove the enemy mid laner under tower and just have them under tower and blast them with Alt Qs. And it's very difficult to play against. Now, the mana pool isn't really going to allow for that, so you probably have to play in a little bit of a different manner. You have to be a little bit more conservative, probably only use 1 Q to shove the wave out, which is going to significantly reduce the speed at which you can push waves, which in turn is going to mean you have less time to go for resets, roams, or poke the enemy under tower. Which again, that matters. That matters because it means Karma snowballs less, and it means she's not going to be as strong when she shows up to these fights. Her Alt E is getting slightly buffed, the base damage, I think, if I'm not mistaken, during the early stages. It's actually buffed the damage at the lower end of levels, and then it's nerfed at the higher end. I think this is just a change for support Karma, because I think support Karma puts 3 points into Q, which is going to be here, and then she maxes E afterwards. But it's going to be slightly worse, actually, with E maxed, but it's going to be better when you don't have points in E. So I think it's for support, because obviously supports doesn't quite get as much levels as mid lane does. But I think this is actually a pretty significant nerf. It might knock her down into the B tier, to be honest. For now, I'm going to keep her in the A tier. But I think there's a very realistic chance that Karma gets knocked straight down into the B tier. But we'll obviously see by next patch what's been happening. But that's what I'm going to say at the moment. Next on the change list, we have Gallo. And boy, get ready for an absolute novel. This champion is getting changed in a very strange manner. Basically, the intention behind all of this, all you really need to know, is that what they want to happen with Riot Games, Big Riot, wants to happen, Big Gallo, I guess, is they want to nerf AP Gallo, like the variant that just one taps you with a Lich Bane. With his passive, he just E's on top of you, presses W, slams with auto attack, throws a Q, calls it a day. They want to nerf that variant of Gallo and make him more into a bruisery, tanky kind of champion. You might remember him during Season 8, I think it was. He was played quite a lot in the mid lane as a tank variant. Faker definitely remembers because he was the pick that made Faker win against RNG in the final, or not in the finals, but in the semis, if I'm not mistaken. That game went to a game 5, and Faker played 5 games of Gallo. My goat. Tank Gallo, by the way. We're not talking AP, so he was not having fun, but he collected his free wins, which is what matters. Yeah, all you really need to know is his AP ratios are going down on Q, on his passive, his smash, on his W, and on his E. Actually, his E is base damage, it's not the AP ratio. Which is pretty rough, right? You're gonna say, wow, that's a pretty big nerf. The buff that he gets to compensate for that nerf is hitting an enemy champion with an ability reduces your passive by 3 seconds. The cooldown of your passive by 3 seconds. So you can weave in a lot more passive procs now, is the idea. And the idea is if you're building tankier, you can now stand on the front line and slap the enemy a lot more with your spells. That's kind of the idea, and with your passive. That is the supposed trade-off. I honestly think this is a pretty big nerf. I'm gonna be completely honest. I don't think this is a good change. I think Gallo is kind of in a bit of a rough spot already now. Playing full AP is only possible in certain situations when you're against an enemy champion in the mid lane that allows for it. If you're not playing against, well, let's say Yone, Yasuo, Zed, Silas, even Tristana, like you need to not be against one of those champions, and then you have to be against a champion that doesn't outscale you, like a Kassadin, like a Talia, or that beats you in fights super hard. There's already a lot of conditions for playing Gallo, so I think this nerf is gonna, or this change is gonna hit him quite heavily. It might just be good enough to a point where Gallo becomes more blind pickable because you can become a tank now, but I would be a little bit concerned. Of course, if you're already playing tank Gallo, then you're smiling. But most people aren't, so if you're playing the AP variant, this is going to be a little bit rough. I actually think I'm going to take him out of the S tier counter pick and put him down into the A tier. Next, we have some Diana changes. Diana, as you can see, is sitting down in the C tier, so she obviously needs some buffs. I know Diana is pretty strong at the lower end of the ladder, so I think I have kind of underrated her by putting her in the C tier, seeing as this tier list is meant for targeting the lower MMRs. So I think I should actually pull her up already. But actually, let's go over her change first. So her change is quite small. The idea is your attack speed ratio goes up. That means you gain more attack speed, right? Your attack speed growth is going down. That is obviously not great. Your passive attack speed growth is going down very slightly as well. That is obviously not great either. But the change here is you get attack speed every level now instead of getting attack speed every 3 levels. This was scaling every 3 levels. It is now scaling every levels because it scales linearly, which that is very cool. I like that. It means that every single time you level up, you get a bit stronger. And your empowered attack speed is tripled for 3 seconds, or 5 seconds now instead of 3 seconds, which is actually a pretty nice change. Generally speaking, I don't think this changes a whole lot about Diana. I honestly don't think this change matters that much. It's not like you're sitting on your passive not hitting anyone for 5 seconds. And if you are, then you're probably going to E on top of them anyway, in which case this 5 seconds doesn't really matter that much. I can only see very specific instances where this would matter. I think I would honestly just prefer to have more attack speed instead of this lasting for 5 seconds. But yeah, I still think I deserve to pull her up into the B tier at least. I think I've kind of done her a little bit dirty by putting her in the C tier. I think she's a very simple champion that can play the game quite easily, I suppose. It's not difficult to navigate her by any means. So I think that she does deserve to sit in the B tier because she can be very obnoxious to play against. People don't really know how to beat her in the laning phase. And obviously, if you can't beat Diana in the laning phase and you end up losing to her, well, then she snowballs very hard. Like, this is a champion that snowballs extremely hard, and it's very difficult to beat her in fights when she gets fed. So I'd highly recommend picking her up if you enjoy that style, but I'm going to put her in the B tier instead of the C tier. That is not because of this change. That is because I think I underrated her. Next, we have some Gragas changes. Basically, what's happening here is his base health is going to go down by 30, and his mana costs on Q are going to go up. I think this is mainly targeting top lane Gragas. I could also see it targeting his one-shot Bomba AP variant mid lane where you rush Lichbane. Kind of same way that the Gallo is getting targeted with this Lichbane rush build. I honestly don't think it's going to matter. The reason it might target that is because his Q damage or his Q mana costs are going up and you don't build mana on that variant of Gragas. But I honestly don't think this changes Gragas' place at all. I still think he's an S tier counter pick into certain champions, into the assassins of the world, such as Akali, such as Sylas, such as Echo. Maybe not Sylas, actually. But I still think he's an S tier counter pick in specific spots against champions that are a little bit lower on the list. Pantheon, Fizz, Diana, Akali. He does very well into these sorts of champions. The dash-reliant champions that are melee. That's when you want to pick Gragas. Also, in case you didn't see, Vigar got a buff last patch. That's why he's now in the S tier. So, if any of you want to play some Vigar, be my guest. I actually think that this champion is incredibly, incredibly strong right now, and I'd highly recommend you guys try him out. He has so many variants. If you want to see a build, or you want to see my thoughts on Vigar, I do have another video on it called titled Play These Champions to Climb. I talk a little bit about Vigar in that video. He has so many different builds, so I'd highly recommend testing him if you enjoy this champion. I think it is complete freeload to play Vigar at the lower end of the ladder. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed. See ya.